more TV shows, more radio shows, more newspaper articles, and more websites than any other person in history on our planet. He has been investigating the subject of UFOs since 1958. Mr. Freeman holds an undergraduate and graduate degrees in physics from the University of Chicago, a nuclear physicist by training. He has worked for such companies as General Electric, General Motors, Westinghouse, TRW Systems, Aerojet General Nucleonics, and McDonnell Douglas. His work has included highly advanced and highly classified secret programs such as the nuclear aircraft, fusion rockets, compact nuclear power plants for space and terrestrial applications. Mr. Freeman is the original civilian investigator of the world-famous Roswell UFO incident, having co-written the top-selling book about the case, Crash at Chromium, the definitive study of the Roswell incident. Mr. Freeman has provided written testimony to U.S. congressional hearings, has appeared twice in the United Nations, and has been a pioneer in many aspects of UFO research. I hope everyone out there, including any noisy naysayers, realize what a great honor it is for me to present to you at this time, Mr. Stanton Friedman.
I think we tripled the crowd in 3 minutes. Change the title of the talk, it doesn't matter. I can say whatever I please, regardless of what the title is. The big thing here is that we're at a moment in time when our view of an awful lot of things is changing. One of them is where we fit in the scheme of things. And mankind has long had the view that it's at the top of the heap. Earth is it, man is at the top of that, we're the big shots. Unfortunately, as time has gone on, we have learned a great deal that says we're not at the top of the heap at all. So the strange title, yes, flying saucers are real, and the Hill star map is there because that's a question of where we are, a particular place in time and space. Let me give my 4 conclusions after 60-some, 58, 52, whatever it is, years of study and investigation. 1, planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft. In other words, some, underlined 26 times, some UFOs are alien spacecraft. Most are not, I don't care about them. Second, we're dealing with a cosmic watergate. Doesn't mean everybody in government knows what's going on and won't tell us. It means some few people in most governments have known since at least the early or the mid-40s that indeed some UFOs are alien spacecraft. Cosmic watergate. 3, there are no good arguments against the first 2 conclusions, and 4, we're dealing with the biggest story of the millennium. Visits to planet Earth by alien spacecraft, successful cover-up of the best data, bodies, and wreckage for at least 65 years. Okay. Now, I picked the Hill case to highlight here because of the star map. It works. Betty and Barney Hill, the most famous abduction case ever. I've had the privilege of working with Betty's niece, Kathleen Martin. We have a new book out about the case. But the important thing is not only that it's a great UFO abduction case, but that it gives us a clue as to where those abductors originate. And there are very few cases with any clue at all as to where these guys are coming from. When Betty was on board the saucer, she saw something that looks a bit like this. And it was a star map, it was probably 3-dimensional. And Betty being Betty, she asked, he's telling it that there are different kinds of lines here, trade routes, occasional expeditions, the base stars, the two big stars at the lower right-hand part here. And Betty isn't fazed by much of anybody. She was a social worker in New Hampshire, supervising the welfare department. And she asked him, so where are you on the map? Wise guy alien says, do you know where you are? No, I don't know anything about astronomy. Well, how can I tell you where I'm from if you don't know when you're at? End of discussion. Very frustrating for Betty. Okay, under hypnosis, she's reliving this experience. And the key man in the whole story is the psychiatrist who was doing the hypnosis, Dr. Benjamin Simon. And he just happened to be one of the world's great experts on having people retrieve lost memories. The treatment of PTSD, shell-shock war victims were the expression used back then. But he actually ran a hospital, 3,000 beds, for World War II veterans suffering from that problem. So he didn't know anything about flying saucers, but boy, did he know a lot about having people get back to life, getting rid of the problems that caused them the difficulty in the first place. And so he asked Betty if she could remember what the map looks like, and she said yes. And he gives her a post-hypnotic suggestion, if and only if she can remember it accurately, please draw it later on. And there it is, and it appeared in the book, The Interrupted Journey. The only trouble is, what does it mean? We haven't a clue. Well, a brilliant woman named Marjorie Fish, you can see how long this picture was taken by looking at the color of my hair and beard. A long time ago. I got a call from the head of the Earth Research Organization. This woman named Marjorie Fish would like to work with a scientist, and Coral knew me, and she said she's working on the Betty Hill star map. So of course I was excited and interested, and I'd met Betty and Barney, and so I visited with her. What she was going to do, she had visited Betty to get as much information as she could. There wasn't a lot in the book, The Interrupted Journey by John Fuller. And she was trying to do a truly phenomenal effort. See if she could build three-dimensional models of our local galactic neighborhood, beads for stars in their proper three-dimensional location, which was a major chore. And she wanted a little guidance. She wasn't getting a lot of help from some of the astronomers. They wouldn't let her take star catalogs out. She had to hand copy all the numbers from the catalogs at Ohio State University. And she built a total of 27 different three-dimensional models. And she thought she'd get many matches to what Betty had drawn. She could get any. Very frustrating. So she started paying attention to what the astronomers were saying about what kind of stars would have planets. And she kept eliminating the stars from the list, so to speak, based on their advice, not hers. And eventually, she found one and only one pattern that matched angle for angle, line length for line length, what Betty had drawn. She was very happy about that. 26 three-dimensional model. She finally found a match. And the important thing was she was able to locate all the stars in the map. The sun was in the map, which was kind of nice, because since they were here. There's her biggest model. This one had 256 stars in it. And I mention it because some people said, well, she only picked the sun-like stars. No, she took all the stars. Gradually, we wheeled it down, cut it down, and the kicker here is she was able to identify the sun is up here. Oh, you can't see it if I do that. Which is kind of nice that the sun is on the model, on the map. The base stars, that's the big question. Two stars you've never heard of, Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 Reticuli. Now, what's interesting here, that's a unique pair of stars, which nobody's heard of before. They just happen to be the closest to each other pair of sun-like stars in our entire local neighborhood. Now we here on Earth, or around the sun, the next star over is 4.3 light years away. These two stars from each other are an eighth of a light year apart. Think of what it would mean. Those two stars are 30 times closer to each other than the sun is to the next star over. We're out in the boonies, they got next door neighbors. And oh, by the way, they just happen to be a cool billion years older than the sun. Billion years older. Now you can't see them from here, you gotta go down below the equator. Those two stars from here are only 39.3 light years away. Now, there's several implications of what I've just said. You've had far more time to develop interstellar travel if they're a billion years older than we are. And you have far more incentive because you've got next door neighbors. Each star is visible all day long from the other one, which is quite a different situation from here. So when somebody says, you can't get to the stars, look how long it takes to get to Andromeda, I laugh and say, why would anybody want to go to Andromeda? That's a galaxy that's 2.5 million light years away. I want to go to Zeta Reticuli, 39.3 light years away. Gives you an entirely different perspective. Somebody asked me here earlier today, where do you think they're from? I said, well, some of them are from Zeta 1 or Zeta 2 Reticuli. Constellation Reticulum. It means the net, if you speak Latin, which I don't, but that's what it means. Okay, so our focus on, where Zeta Reticuli. She identified all those stars. The sun is, as I said, up here. And those are distances in light years. It's an old map, all the numbers have changed a little bit. It's very difficult to measure the distances. But when the European Space Agency put up a satellite, Hipparcos, they made millions of measurements, good measurements of distances. So we don't need to guess anymore. Got lots of good data. It's amazing that Marjorie did all the work she did with the lousy data that was available. But see, astronomers aren't interested in going anyplace else. They know you can't get here from there. That's one of the problems in this field, is they keep telling, I don't know how many of you read the comment about a month ago from the British Astronomer Royal, only kooks see UFOs. That's typical of the nasty, noisy negativists, and in their ignorance, doing their research by proclamation. Investigation is a much better approach. And a great scientist that I happen to know, when we first talked about UFOs, said, when I was young, I thought you wouldn't be excited to go to Andromeda. Then I realized how much energy it would take. My own feeling was, who cares about Andromeda? I want to go 39 light years, not over 2 million light years away. So, where do we sit? Well, we sit off in the corner, not much going on. It's interesting, I published the first article about Marjorie's work in Saga magazine, which I'm sure everybody recalls, not. And then I convinced the editor of Astronomy magazine, Terry Dickinson, to do an article about Marjorie's work. It got more response than anything they'd ever published. And over the next year, they published 11 letters in response. And then they put out this 32-page, full-color booklet. They sold 10,000 copies immediately, which is unheard of for this sort of thing. And then Carl Sagan's lawyer, because his name was on the front, he had sent in one of the letters. They made him an offer, or made me an offer I couldn't refuse, because they threatened them with a legal action. Because I had suggested the story in the first place, it came to me. Would you like to buy these at a good price? Yes, indeed. wound up with 18,000 copies in my garage in California. Moved about 10,000 of them to Fredericton, New Brunswick, and I don't have any and haven't had for years, haven't had any luck. People were interested, no question about it. For those who think only kooks even believe in UFOs or see them, as the English astronomer Royal proclaimed. I wish I could say a bunch, but I don't have it. Now, one of the problems you have in this field is that naturally there are those who want flying saucers to be real. Because if aliens are coming here, why would anybody listen to the radio telescope for signals that you don't know anybody is sending? The SETI boys. That's Dr. Seth Shostak and me on board the Queen Elizabeth II. We were both honored guests across the Atlantic. We each gave 3 lectures. We each attended the other's lectures. In the course of mine, I talked about 5 large-scale scientific studies, and I asked after each one, how many of you have read this? And of course, Seth had read none. We did a debate on coast-to-coast radio. He still hadn't read any. But he did say a year or 2 or 3 after that he had a copy of my book, Flying Saucers and Science, on his nightstand. He didn't say he read it. He said he had a copy. I sent it to him with his permission. So SETI really should be, you should be told that what it means is silly effort to investigate, rather than search for extraterrestrial intelligence. They presume that somebody out there is sending us signals, for what reason I have no idea, using technology appropriate to our primitive technology. First long-distance radio, 1901. And they're still stuck at that level of technology? I don't use a slide rule anymore. I hope some of you know what a slide rule is. I said that to 2 college classes in Michigan and got no reaction. I asked, how many of you know what a slide rule is? Not one! And that was within my lifetime. I started working in industry using a slide rule. So why anybody would be sending us radio signals, I have no idea. I mean, what are they going to say? Hey, we're bringing 20 people for dinner. Set us up for 2013. You know, your finest meals. Ridiculous. But you realize, if somebody's coming here, you don't need SETI. Maybe you need sign language. Now, one of the many myths about flying saucers is you can't get here from there. Everybody knows that. Well, it's not true. This just happens to be one of a number of nuclear fission rocket engines. And I want you to realize that this was operated in the 1960s by Los Alamos and its big brother, the Phoebus 2B, about 8 feet in diameter. Power level was only 4,400 megawatts. The power level of Grand Coulee Dam is about 2,000 megawatts. Awful lot of energy. The exhaust temperature was over 4,000 degrees. This is a fission nuclear rocket. But of course, most of the ancient academics and fossilized physicists don't even know that it existed. Now, we'll talk about fusion, a better way to go deep space, in a few minutes. But this is real hardware. It's not science fiction. You paid for it. When I worked at Westinghouse, we built one. Not quite as large, only 1,100 megawatts. Very exciting. Now, one of the things that people miss is that we already have known for a long period of time that if you want to go any place far, you're probably going to use nuclear energy rather than chemical energy. Now, the proof of that is we realized in 1944, a big bomb was a 10-ton blockbuster, 10 tons of dynamite, TNT. That's how much energy is released in these things. That was in 1944. Make a pretty good sized hole in the ground. 1945, our first nuclear fission weapon was used. Released the energy of about 18,000 tons of TNT. 1952, before many of you were born, we tested our first H-bomb, a fusion device. What's the big deal? It released the energy of 10 million tons of TNT. So from 1944 to 1952, 8 years, we went from 10 tons of explosive energy under our control to 10 million tons. And the Russians outdid us a few years later with a 57 million tons of energy release, TNT energy release. 57 million tons. If you set that off in the middle of New Jersey, you'd start fires from New York to Philadelphia. Some people would say that's not a bad idea. I grew up in New Jersey, but anyway. Now, I bring this up because obviously, if you're trying to get a lot of energy in a small package to get you someplace distant, you're going to move at least first toward nuclear energy. You'll notice that in the drawing, that's a nuclear powered, whoops, wrong button, actually. A nuclear powered submarine. They go around the world underwater without refueling and without coming to the surface. They take periscope leave when they go by New Jersey, Hawaii. But the next slide, we've gone a step beyond that. This is a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. Does it control a lot of energy? You betcha. That can go for 18 years without refueling. That's an awful lot of tanks of gasoline. This has been around for some time. So man is already using the power of the nucleus. The next step is nuclear fusion. And everybody in the universe is going to try to figure out how its sun, its star, produces its energy. We figured it out about 1938. And in 14 years, we built our first H-bomb. I did a study of fusion propulsion systems for deep space travel way back in like 1961. If you use the right stuff in the right way and get particles out the back end that have 10 million times as much energy per particle as they can get in a dumb old chemical rocket. So when anybody tells you we don't know how to go out there, nobody can do that. It's a question of money. You want to spend the dough, if you do, you'll go. I'm not saying we should. But nuclear fusion is something that every advanced civilization, meaning 10 years older than we are, is going to know about. But of course, the SETI guys never talk about these things. We don't need to go shopping. We also know that people who aren't accustomed to doing calculations about deep space travel usually get it wrong. A Canadian astronomer, Dr. Campbell, 1941, calculated the required initial launch way to get a rocket to the moon and back with a person on board. He said, utterly ridiculous, pages of equations. It would have to weigh 1 million tons. And he was a little bit off. We got 3 guys to the moon and back, so the dumb old chemical rocket's initial launch weight was 3,000 tons. It was off by a factor of 300 million. Now that's really making a serious miscalculation. And I have a book over there, Science Was Wrong, just to illustrate that very often highly trained, highly educated people make utterly stupid statements about what's possible. And one area in which they do it almost all the time is deep space travel. Can't get here from there. One astronomer on the Peter Jennings mockumentary of February 24th, 2005, said our fastest craft would take 70,000 years to get to the nearest star. And scientists want their data sooner than that. He doesn't tell you that it doesn't have a propulsion system on it. It's coasting, like throwing a bottle in the ocean to find out how long it takes to go around the ocean. Some of you may not remember, but old Magellan's ship went around the Earth in 3 years. He didn't make it, but the ship did, in 1520. Then it was around the world in 80 days. Now the space station up there does it in 90 minutes. So from 3 years to 90 minutes in a few hundred years. Progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. It's a lesson the nasty, noisy negativists don't seem to want to learn. In our book, there are a lot of examples of people saying something was impossible, which was achieved very soon thereafter. We pay a huge price for listening to these overeducated, ignorant people. Now, cosmic freeloading, you may wonder, what the heck is that? Well, what it is using Mother Nature. When we go to the moon, there's a launch window, because if you launch at the right time, the moon will come along and use its gravitational field to get you there easier. All our deep space probes. We've got a satellite out at Saturn. We sent it past Venus to get a free kick, sent it past Earth to get another free kick, sent it past Jupiter to get yet another free kick. So it had to be much smaller than would otherwise have been the case. Why not take advantage of Mother Nature? If you want to get something down from a high point, you might roll it down instead of carrying it down. Cosmic freeloading. And I think it's important we make a distinction between motherships and excursion modules. What I mean is, to go back to the carrier, we have one system to get us between the stars, and another, once you're here, to zip around in the atmosphere. Two entirely different environments. Doesn't do you much good to go the speed of light when you're traipsing around the Earth. It takes a seventh of a second to go around the planet. And you need somebody for lunch at that kind of speed. So cosmic freeloading, good engineering. And you'll notice that there are two different sources of power. The nuclear-powered aircraft carrier is indeed nuclear power, but the airplanes it carries, they need refueling every couple of hours. All aliens would know of fusion. I'm not saying it's the ultimate, because we Earthlings are ignorant. We haven't been around very long. Undoubtedly, there will be new and better means of propulsion found, but we already know how to do it. That's your typical H-bomb. The fireball is only 3 miles wide. I wonder what the aliens thought when they saw that one go off. What are these idiots up to now? You see, I presume that from an alien viewpoint, we're a very primitive society whose major activity is tribal warfare. In case you didn't notice, in World War II, we Earthlings killed about 60 million other Earthlings. 60 million. We destroyed 1,700 cities. We're not nice guys and gals. This year we will spend $1 trillion on things military. And yet thousands of children die every single day of preventable disease or starvation. Why don't the aliens land and talk to us? I don't talk to the squirrels in my backyard. Why would anybody want to talk to us? Oh, they got to land on the White House lawn. Does anybody tell me that there's any evidence that the President of the United States speaks for 7 billion Earthlings? He has trouble speaking for 310 million Americans. And how utterly silly. There were sightings of UFOs over Washington in 1952. Chased away by airplanes. It's a no-fly zone. Loads of sightings. On radar, too. fusion reactions. Don't let them scare you, but I want to introduce a unit to you. Well, I didn't want to go through this again, but I guess we'll have to do it. You've just heard this already, so we'll go on to the next one. Now, when it comes to UFO information, there are 4 basic rules for the debunkers. What the public doesn't know, I'm not going to tell them. So they never talk about the 5 large-scale scientific studies. Biggest one, Blue Book Special Report 14, only has data on 3,201 sightings. It was done for the United States Air Force. But of course the noisy negativists don't talk about it because it makes a very strong case for some UFOs being alien spacecraft. 21.5% of the sightings couldn't be explained, completely separate from the 9.3% for which there wasn't enough information. That's a fact. Here's what the Secretary of the Air Force said about this study. On the basis of this study, we believe that no objects such as those properly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. I feel certain that even the unknown 3% could have been explained as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been available. That's the Secretary of the Air Force, mind you. The only trouble is it's a total and complete lie. The unknowns weren't 3%, they were 21.5%, and by their own definition, they were not the sightings for which there was insufficient information. That was a separate category. But they got away with it. No news group pointed out the false statements being made. Now, we got to believe the government, don't we? No, we don't. Here's what Carl Sagan said. The reliable cases are uninteresting, and the interesting cases are unreliable. Unfortunately, there are no cases that are both reliable and interesting. Carl and I were classmates at the University of Chicago for 3 years. He is totally wrong. He provided no evidence, no reference. They did do a quality evaluation, reliability evaluation. Let's see if we got the table here. Yeah. It turns out that the better the quality of the sighting, the more likely to be unexplainable, and the least likely to be listed as insufficient information. And yet, constantly, the nasty, noisy negativists will tell you there aren't any good sightings. It's only cases that couldn't be explained because there wasn't enough data. Totally untrue. That it's okay to lie in the name of debunking. And the media does it all the time. Like Lord Rees saying that only kooks see UFOs. There are books with sightings by astronomers. He obviously hadn't read them, unfortunately. Here's the breakdown of all the cases. Now, some people, only kooks, that's saying that it's a psychological problem. They had a category. Psychological, this is manifestation. It was too long to fit there. And some people say psychological aberration. 1.5%. The American Physical Society, to which I and other physicists belong, most of us, said that 2% of the papers written by members of the American Physical Society are crackpot cases. That means there are more crackpots associated with physics than with flying saucers. I'm one of the few with a foot in each camp, you understand. So is it true that we're dealing with psychological stuff? No, it is not. Unknowns, that's the ones we want. Those. That's much higher than the percentage of people who are 7 feet tall. But no basketball coach is saying, well, since 98% of the people aren't 7 feet tall, none are. We have better sense than that most of the time. Here's testimony before Congress. 12 scientists. I was the youngest and the only one without a pile higher or deeper degree, PhD in common parlance. 3 of the people were astronomers, incidentally. The best paper by far was Dr. James E. McDonald, a professor of physics at the University of Arizona, who talked to over 500 witnesses and presented data on 41 of the best cases. There's Jim. Outstanding ufologist. There's Dr. J. Allen Hynek, of all people, an astronomer. He was only the Air Force scientific consultant on Project Blue Book for 20 years. But the British Astronomer Royal couldn't be bothered finding out about him. You'd think he'd know a little bit after 20 years connection with the Air Force Project Blue Book. There's a scientific study of unidentified flying objects. Now, the title is misleading, and it's 965 pages, and there's a lot of baloney in it, but when you look at it carefully, according to a special UFO subcommittee of the world's largest group of space scientists, the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, 30% of the 117 cases studied in detail could not be identified. And they said one could come to the opposite conclusions from Dr. Condon's based on the data in the report. The press wasn't told that, of course. Now, one of the other peculiar things that the nasty, noisy negativists will say is there are no secrets being kept. Governments can't keep secrets from the public. We all know that, don't we? Well, no. Seth Shostak again said, proof that the government can't keep secrets is how bad they handled Katrina with FEMA. And that the post office isn't well run. What in the world has that got to do with whether they can keep secrets? I mean, that's ridiculous. You might talk about the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office of the National Security Agency, or the Central Intelligence Agency, or the Office of Special Investigations of the Air Force, or the Office of Naval Intelligence. These are the groups who keep secrets. Of course, he didn't mention that. Another great astronomer had it his way. He said that we know how poor the government is at keeping secrets by how much we know about President Clinton's genitalia. That really shows the government can't keep secrets, doesn't it? Where do these guys come off with these statements? To promulgate nonsense about the public ought to be some kind of a sin, if you will. This is a typical CIA UFO document, top secret, umbra. You can read, I think it's 6 words. Or, no, I'm sorry, 8 words in this one. Not very exciting words. And don't tell me to scrape off the block because they Xerox it first. They're not stupid enough to send you the original documents. There's another one, also a CIA, top secret umbra UFO document. You can read about 8 words, meaningless ones. This is one of my favorite lines from a CIA UFO document. It only took me 5 years to get it. Denied in toto. They couldn't find 8 words to declassify. But they're not keeping any secrets, Dan. Now here's one from the NSA. NSA means no such agency. I'm sorry, it means National Security Agency. Or never says anything. Now, when I called, because I heard they were putting out a new bunch of stuff, they knew who I was, and it scared me a little bit. Well, it turns out that one of the noisy negativists, Bill Classett, told them that I show these blacked out documents without telling people that it's sources and methods data that they're keeping back. So they used whiteout. They think we're stupid. I got 156 pages that look like this, about 1 sentence. You can read, and everything else is whited out. But there's not any secrets being kept from the public. There's another one, just to give you an idea. Now, one of the biggest secrets that's been kept is the real story about what organization was set up to deal with flying saucers. I believe it was a group called Majestic 12, or MJ 12, or Magic 12, M-A-J-I-C. This is my book. We got a roll of film in the mail on which there were 8 pages of this document, these MJ-12 documents, that had been top secret magic. The question is whether the documents are genuine. They make some strong claims that President Truman set up this group in 1947. It named the members of the group an all-star cast, and it said that they were dealing with the question of flying saucers. And people have been arguing and arguing about, oh, those documents are all phony. In this book, I go through the arguments against genuineness and show that none of them stand up. There's a whole bunch of phony documents, but there are 3 that are genuine, and boy, they're humdingers. And if I'm very lucky, rights to the book have been bought, optioned for a movie, Magic Man. It'll be sort of like, let's see, the book about Woodward and Bernstein, All the President's Men, and little JFK thrown in. And I want Richard Dreyfuss to play me, of course. He was born in 1947, for what that's worth. It's funny how the arguments get made. More of those don't bother me with the facts, my mind's made up kind of thing. Now, this summarizes the thing. There are 3 genuine ones. I don't care about all the phony ones once I showed that they were phony. Now, there's a lot of good information, data not previously known. The real surprise is that one of the members was a supposed debunker, Donald Howard Menzel, professor of astronomy at Harvard. Wrote 3 anti-UFO books. Always said there was nothing to it. How could he have been a member of a committee that knew all about flying saucers? Well, I got permission from 3 different people to look at his papers at Harvard, and he wrote to Jack Kennedy that he, Menzel, had a longer continuous connection with the National Security Agency of anybody in the country, more than 30 years. He was an expert at breaking codes, cryptography. Did consulting work for 30 different companies, classified work. I had to get permission from 3 different people to see his papers. I was totally shocked at what I found because I didn't like him when he was alive. When I realized he was dead and all that he had done in the service of keeping secrets about flying saucers, I was much more generous in my view. The book's worth a read. The movie will be Magic Men. It was optioned along with Don Schmidt and Tom Perry's book, Witness to Roswell. So it'll be a challenging, exciting, fact-filled, hopefully great movie, he says. I hate to admit it, but more people watch movies than read books. You may have noticed that along the way. Now, one of the noisy negativists was a man named Philip Glass, wrote 3 anti-UFO books. His, how shall I close, his moral code, twice when he was on Larry King, he attacked the book that was being discussed. And when Larry, by surprise, asked him later in the show if he'd read the book, he said no. This is science, this is creative tomfoolery, I would say. But he challenged one of the documents because it was in the large pica type. He'd never been to the Eisenhower Library. I've spent weeks there. And he challenged me, perhaps he didn't notice it was done in the large pica type. I challenge you to find any other genuine National Security Council documents done in the same size pica type. And I'll give you $100 each, up to a maximum of 10, unfortunately. I say unfortunately because when I went to the Eisenhower Library, I dug out 14 and sent him an invoice, and he paid me my $1,000. He told everybody about challenging me and nobody about paying me. Typical of the noisy negativists. It's an utterly ridiculous charge. The Eisenhower Library alone is 250,000 pages of National Security Council material. You can think you can judge from 9 to 250,000. That's typical of the intellectual bankruptcy of the pseudoscience of anti-ufology. I like the way that sounds. That's a nice ring to it. Dear old Phil. Some people say, oh, there were no documents. The government didn't use top secret restricted. Well, the General Accounting Office went and looked, and as they stated in a memo they wrote, we found many instances of the use of top secret restricted, even though we had been informed that it wasn't in use at that time. They said, oh, all top secret documents have to have top secret control numbers. The archivists at 2 archives sent me statements that they have plenty of top secret documents that don't have top secret control numbers. The use of generic ranks. One of the documents says Admiral Hillenkotter, who's head of the CIA also. He was not an admiral, he was only a vice admiral. Well, it turns out use of generic ranks was standard practice, and I turned up many examples of that. Another one was the typewriter was wrong, so we had a forensic examiner check it out, the typewriter was right. It's very easy to criticize if you don't need to justify your criticism. Do your research by proclamation. Investigation is too much trouble. This is one of the documents. Top secret magic. That doesn't read very well, I'm sorry. There's a good copy in the book. This lists the members of the group. Outstanding, 3 Army, 3 Navy, 3 Air Force, 3 Directors of Central Intelligence. Outstanding group of people. There they are. And you heard about those earlier today, as a matter of fact. Oh, this is one of the ones, this is the one that Phil Glass said the typeface was wrong. When you check things out, the typeface is buggy. There he is. He got very angry when I published a copy of his check in one of my books. Threatened to sue me. Whoops. How did I manage to do that? Some people have talent. Anybody know how I stopped that? What did I do? Keep going back.
2 down.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. You think that'll work okay? I'm going to hold you down. Oh. I confused the computer. Okay, thank you. This There's Bill. There's his check. He got very angry and he sent me a nasty letter threatening to sue me. I told him, Phil, you sent me a check. I Xeroxed it. I took the check to the bank, they cashed it, I can do whatever I please with the Xerox. He shut up. The big surprise was Dr. Donald Menzel, who everybody said, Stan, come on, he was a total debunker. But they didn't know that he was a world-class cryptographer. That he told Kennedy he had a long and continuous association with the National Security Agency. That he did highly classified work for all kinds of people, but they wouldn't believe me when I showed them the evidence. How can he be a debunker and work on the inside? Well, there were 3 guys who worked for English intelligence, supposedly, who were Russian agents. Happens all the time. So I developed a respect for Dr. Menzel. Reluctantly, but I did. Magic Men. That'll be the name of the movie if it gets made. I'm hoping, you never know with Hollywood. I'm supposed to see a screenplay within the next month. And it's had very good response. Bryce Zabel, who did the movie, the television program, Dark Skies, many years ago, knows a lot about this stuff. The same people have also taken a movie option on Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience. There's Bryce in the middle. Don Schmidt is the author of the other book, the UFO Witness to Roswell. And I might be lucky enough to have 2 movies made of my books while I'm still alive. I'm not taking bets on that. This is Hollywood we're talking about here. But it would be fun. There's an interesting man named General Harold Bolender. We sort of inadvertently found a memo he'd written. He was given the job in 1969 after the University of Colorado study said, cancel Project Blue Book. He was an Air Force general and engineer, worked on the lunar excursion module. We were successful in 1969, and yes, I believe we went on the moon. That's why I had this 6th man to walk on the moon, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, right forward for my book, Flying Saucers of Science. But yes, I believe he did walk on the moon, as did others. Anyway, General Bolender was given the job. What should we do about Project Blue Book? He knew, had no connection with it, been working very hard on the lunar excursion module. I found him 10 years after we found this memo. And in his memo, he said we should cancel Project Blue Book. He said, reports of UFOs which could affect national security are made in accordance with JNAP, Joint Army Navy Air Force Publication 146, or Air Force Manual 55-11, and are not part of the Blue Book system. An extraordinary statement. Since the Air Force has been saying since 1969 that we don't do anything about UFOs. He said 2 paragraphs after that statement, if we close Project Blue Book, the public won't have a place to report UFO sightings. However, as previously noted, reports which could affect national security will continue to be investigated using the procedures designed for that purpose. No major news media has ever commented about that. It proves the government's been lying about flying saucers and their involvement for a long time. Now, I located General Bolender, and I said to him, I said, look, I had a security clearance for 14 years. I understand about such things. It seems to me you are saying that there are 2 independent reporting channels. One for those sightings which could affect national security, and the other for the run-of-the-mill things. And we agreed a typical case might be, suppose a saucer flew down the runway at a strategic air command base where nuclear weapons are stored. That's a national security problem. If we all go outside and look up and there's a flying saucer, would that be a great way to handle that? Happens all the time. The Mutual UFO Network receives more than 600 reports a month of UFO sightings. And most people don't report their sightings. And he agreed. 2 separate channels. No major media group has ever published General Bolender's comments. He's dead now, you can't talk to him, but I did before he died, of course. That's what he said. Here's my book, Flying Saucers and Science. There is a chapter on the large-scale scientific studies. There's another one on You Can Get Here from There. There's another one on flying saucers and science fiction. And I give a hard time to Isaac Asimov, Ben Bova, and Arthur C. Clarke for saying very stupid things about UFOs. And I ask such questions or answer them as, why would anybody come here anyway? And can secrets be kept? And I give examples. Just one, the NRO, National Reconnaissance office admitted several years ago that they've had a contract with Boeing to look at new architecture for the NRO spy satellites. Some of their satellites cost $500 million. Very sophisticated. They had a contract with Boeing to figure out a better way of building those satellites. Didn't get what they wanted, so they canceled the contract. They'd only spent $13 billion. And secrets can't be kept, huh? A lot of other stuff in the book, and there are copies over there. Now, just a couple of little technical points. There's a guy who wrote a book, Physics for People Who Don't Think They Like Physics. In it, he says when you get to 9 Gs, how many Gs, how much acceleration can a person stand? When you get to 9 Gs, you die. Well, if you're being accelerated at 9 Gs and run into a solid wall, yeah. Of course we can stand more properly constrained. You may have noticed that the astronauts go up on their back. Why? Because the body can stand far more acceleration back to front than foot to head. This illustrates that. 3 different directions with regard to the body. How much time can he stand? Well, a trained pilot can perform a tracking test while being accelerated at 14 Gs for 2 minutes. That's an acceleration of about 300 miles per hour per second. That's measured data. If they had a light off the rocket when the astronauts were going to the moon, when it was still on the pad, you know, this little rocket on top of the command module, the astronauts would have to take 13 Gs. One of the scientists who was doing a lot of experiments on these sleds that get you up to very high velocity and then slam on the brakes. They were a little excessive. He got up to over 600 miles an hour, and he stopped in 3/4 of a second, which meant he took over 30 Gs, over 40 Gs in that case. He lived to tell the tale and died in his late 80s. If you know what you're doing, you can get a lot done. If you don't, if you make stupid assumptions, you can prove all kinds of things are impossible. Bad habit the earthling scientists have. Just remember that when somebody tells you you can't stand the G's. Now, how can you move around? Here's an electromagnetic submarine. You say, what the heck has that got to do with flying saucers? With replaced seawater, which is an electrically conducting fluid, with ionized air, which is also an electrically conducting fluid, you can control all the problems of high-speed flight. You can control lift, drag, heating, sonic boom production, radar profile. I had a literature search done of the government literature sources using one word, magnetohydrodynamics. I got 900 references. 90% were classified. This is back in 1970. Somebody was looking at ionizing the air around craft. So that might take care of the Earth excursion module. Fusion from the deep spacecraft. This was built, obviously. This was operated at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Dr. Stuart Way, a Westinghouse research scientist, was in charge. EMS-1, Electromagnetic Submarine 1. Dr. Stuart Way in the middle with the bald head. Only cost him a couple $1,000, and student labor, of course. There are papers, I show you this to show this theory that goes with this. Now here's a Roswell, we've seen this slide about this already. And Dennis Balthaser has copies of this article. And somebody tried to insist, this was a Springfield, RAAF, that's Royal Australian Air Force. Sorry, it's Roswell Army Airfield. No details of flying discs were revealed. This was July 8, 1947. The story appeared in evening papers from Chicago West. Came out too late in Roswell, it hit the morning papers. And I had somebody say, well, it only appeared in the Roswell paper, it couldn't have been a big story. And I showed him, I had sent the television program that he was with copies of half a dozen papers, the Chicago Daily News, the Spokane Chronicle, the Sacramento Bee, and a bunch more. But it sounded good to say it was only in the Roswell paper. Sorry, it was in lots of papers. That's the Chicago Daily News, just to mention. That's one of my favorites. This has both stories. Army finds flying saucer, general believes it was radar weather gadget. Los Angeles Herald-Examiner. You've seen this picture earlier today too. General Ramey and Colonel Dubose. I was able to locate Dubose, met with him. Here's the, there. The Air Force said, oh, we sent that to one of our agencies, and they couldn't find any print on that piece of paper. Dr. David Rudiak managed to pretty much figure out the whole message with things like victims of the wreck. Not the kind of thing you expect from a weather balloon, right? There's Dr. Jesse Marcel Jr. And typical of the media, who were both interested, interviewed for the Peter Jennings mockumentary that was broadcast on February 24th, 2005, in Roswell. They interviewed Jesse at some length. At the time, he was on leave from the Army, where he was a colonel serving in Iraq. He'd been called back in, as you were told, when he was 68, flew 225 combat hours in helicopters. And yet when they interviewed him, they didn't bother to mention that he was a medical doctor, a flight surgeon in those combat hours, 40-year connection with the military. That's not cricket. They interviewed me for an hour. They used 20 seconds, and they called me a promoter twice. They didn't say I was a nuclear physicist, of course. It's the kind of thing you have to watch out for. And I thought I'd get a good deal from Peter Jennings. We both were born on July 29th. We're both Canadians and Americans. I'd forgotten that Benito Mussolini was also born on July 29th. So I didn't get a square deal. But this is the kind of thing you get aggravated about. I didn't. Here's Jesse's book. I have some copies over there. I wrote the foreword, so I've autographed the book. A great guy. I'm the only one who's been in his home and his father's home, incidentally. I was the first to talk to his dad about Roswell. There's Colonel Blanchard. And I had one debunker say, oh, he was a loose cannon. Sure, he got 4 more promotions to 4-star general and was vice chief of staff of the Air Force, and he died of a massive heart attack. Loose cannon? On the way up, he was in charge of operations for the Strategic Air Command. Had thousands of nuclear weapons under his control. I sure hope he wasn't a loose cannon. And there was an obituary in the New York Times. The Roswell Report. What an example of massive misrepresentation this one was. And I don't like, it lies about me too, and I don't like that. Here's my favorite Roswell explanation. You see, in that first report, they said, we're not going to say anything more about Roswell. So, 3 years later, they did another report. They lied again. This is the one that has the infamous explanation of crash test dummies. The dummy's the one in the middle. You'll notice I talked to the man on the right, Colonel Madsen, when he was alive. He was in charge of the program. He stressed to me that the dummies were 6 feet tall and weighed 175 pounds. You'll notice they're in flight uniforms too. Not for show, but because that affects, as you heard the other day with Felix Baumgartner, what you're wearing is going to affect how you interact with the air, whether you freeze to death, the drag and all that sort of thing. None of these were dropped until 6 years after Roswell, so we have time travel for crash test dummies. And the press bought it, hook, line, and sinker. They didn't talk to Colonel Madsen. I did, in person, in Roswell. Not in Roswell, I'm sorry, Albuquerque. There's my early book. I may have one copy left. There are others listed on the free book list back there. It really happened closer to Corona. And they loved me in Corona. They had a sign during the 50th anniversary. Forget about Roswell. This is on an old theater. Forget about Roswell. It all happened here. Which is kind of true. A few good UFO pictures. This is from Trindade, off the coast of Brazil. 4 pictures taken by an official Brazilian Navy photographer. The pictures are released to the press, to the public, by the president of Brazil, Juscelino Kubitschek. Not usually known as a hoaxer. There's 2 more good ones, just blow-ups. Daytime. Santa Ana, California. This is one of several. Excellent picture. Got 100 pages of analysis of these photos. They're legit. The noisy negativists never tell you about the physical trace cases. Saucers are seen all over the planet, landing on or near the ground, being done there. And once they take off, you find burned surface burn rings, landing gear marks, footprints. Ted Phillips of Missouri has collected more than 4,000 such cases from 70 countries. And they're dull after you read the first 200. Same thing that keeps happening all over. This is in Delphos, Kansas. I was there, got soil samples from Ted Phillips. The ring soil won't grow anything. The normal soil from a few feet away grows stuff fine. Normal soil on the left, ring soil on the right. It's loaded with soluble minerals. There's too much salt. No wonder, and I don't get upset about that sophisticated soil retention device there. Somebody said, how did you dare to show a paper plate? I said, well, when I was at the University of Chicago, there was a Nobel Prize-winning physics experiment that used an empty coffee can to hold up a certain piece of equipment. If they can use a coffee can, I can use a paper plate. Now, where do we fit? Nicolaus Copernicus. 1543, his book said, the sun was the middle of the universe, the earth was not. He died that same year, so he couldn't be burned at the stake as Giordano Bruno was 2 years later. The book was banned by the church for 300 years. Man is at the top of the heap. Copernicus got rid of the Ptolemaic system, which said Earth is the center of the universe. Once in a while I have a sense of humor. The Roswell UFO Hall of Fame named me a member. Local paper in St. John, New Brunswick, did a cartoon in my honor. It's always nice to be appreciated by your peers. Recognized by your peers. It's hard to read on the screen down here. Roswell UFO Hall of Fame. I like those cute little guys. It proves the press can give you a good deal. Here's a bunch of books. Some of them are over there. Let's turn the lights on. Let me say thank you for listening. I'll try to answer your questions. Thank you. Can we turn the lights on? Somebody knows where the switches are in the back there, on the wall. Here come the lights. Yeah, there we go. Question?
Of all the obvious shapes and configurations of life, why would extraterrestrials look like small people? I mean, I don't know if there's an answer, but it strikes me as an obvious.
I don't know why they would look like small people, except that's the way they are. Presumably, it's because their gravitational field is different from ours.
Why don't they look like toads or snails or bugs?
Because they don't. We have, you know, our predictions of the way things should look
Well, it just
have
strikes,
nothing to do with how they do look.
but it just strikes me as a hell of a coincidence.
I don't think it's a coincidence at all. We may be somebody's prop.
It's an
We may be
obvious
we may be somebody's colony.
All right,
Very likely a penal colony.
all right. The Australia.
Well, you know, they sent all their bad boys and girls here. Australia was descended from convicts, and they like it. When you go down there, they make a big real kick about that. Maybe that's a standard approach for life forms. You know, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head and a body. I've seen the justification for that. You need your eyes up at the top so you can see your enemies. 2 is fine. You don't need 3 to do binocular vision, you know. You need some way of grappling with things so you can build stuff. And there's a whole long list like this. It's just the way it is. We got to live with it. If you think we should have 3 arms, well, see what you can do about it. So the why doesn't enter into it.
Okay.
I don't think it does anyway. Yes.
I wonder if you're familiar with Dr. Wadowyak, who actually was on some of the early Mars missions. Excuse me.
What's his name?
Wadowyak, Professor Wadowyak. He's from the University of Alabama in Birmingham, and of course Alabama has a long history in space. Wadowyak.
Huntsville.
Yes, absolutely. And Wadowyak's focus was on looking at life on Mars. And I'm curious what you think of the current Mars missions and what your thoughts may be on that.
Well, you know, I don't blame guys for wanting to find tiny life on Mars. It would prove that this isn't the only place where there is life of any sort. They don't have guts enough to go after flying saucers. You know, it's like saying, we have no evidence whatsoever that there's anybody out there sending signals to us, radio signals. But that's perfectly okay, that's good science. Looking at the enormous amount of evidence we have from all over the planet of humanoid beings, using the term in sort of general sense, visiting here. And we don't have people in Germany seeing froggy-looking creatures, you know, in Japan, small elephants or anything like that. Humanoids, that seems to be the general rule for things. I'm not saying there isn't someplace out there where they're looking at a different life, but we gotta go with what we got. So I think that I was impressed with getting Curiosity down on Mars. That was pretty incredible how they landed that monstrous craft. So I think it's a good way to keep those scientists interested in checking it out. And it's a good way to avoid criticism for looking at something as crazy as flying saucers, even though there's lots of evidence for that. But if you look at saucers, you run into the cosmic water here. The government doesn't want you to do that. So, what does he say? He thinks it's a good idea?
Wadowyak, in my study, or my classes that I took with him at the university back in the 90s, and hanging out in his laboratory and studying of life, his take on it was that it's a numbers game, statistics and probabilities. There's trillions of galaxies and stars, and as much diverse life as there is on this planet, there's just as much diverse life out in the universe.
Yea, verily.
I beg pardon?
Yea, verily.
And so he kind of looked at it from those, as well as the elements that make up life. There's, I guess, 7 elements. Now, I'm not a doctor or scientist, but I guess there's 7 elements that are prevalent throughout the universe.
Yep.
That can make life.
There's nothing special about Earth, that's the point. We'd like to think there are special things. Pat Robertson, I haven't mentioned him, but he thinks we're the only intelligent life in the universe that's here. All the intelligent life in the universe is here on Earth. All that UFO stuff is the work of the devil. Pat also thinks the world was created in 4004 BC. Thursday afternoon, I think it was. And he can believe whatever he pleases. That's his right. But he's trying to get everybody else to believe that too, by providing no evidence whatsoever to substantiate that nonsense. I know God made it look like the Grand Canyon was created over millions of years, but really it was less than 4,000. That's his theory. How he is qualified to make that judgment, I have no idea. So, these guys are out there, but most people have looked at the picture of it's a huge universe and we're probably not the only ones. What a waste of space. You know, and I go along with that. And the reason I do is because we have evidence that others are coming here. Very straightforward. Those beings in the Betty and Barney Hill case, humanoid, little guys with big heads, all right, kind of skinny bodies, but humanoid. Now, what their biology is, I haven't any idea. There's plenty of time for other forms of life to have evolved. The ammonia breathers go to Jupiter for their vacation, of course. So it's an interesting, there's nothing wrong with people studying life forms, but let's look at the total picture. 6% of Ted Phillips' cases involve beings seen associated with the craft that are on the ground. 6%. That's a lot out of 4,000. So, you know, we got to make do with what we got. Other questions? Yeah.
What do you think the rumors of the Lockheed TR-3B?
What? I didn't hear that.
What did I think of the rumors of the Lockheed TR-3B? There was such a thing. And Frank Kaufman he was somebody's prize witness. It turns out he was lying about everything he said, but we only found that out when he died. There have been plenty of secret vehicles built. Secrets are easy to keep if you're careful and enforce the rules and so forth.
Under threat of death.
What?
Under threat of death.
And the threat of, well, only death. I mean, is that the worst thing that can happen to you? Maybe you can be tortured.
And your children.
So I don't think that explains flying saucers. And Frank, after he died, we found out he was lying about a whole bunch of things, including showing a picture of that, and that's what he said the Roswell thing looked like. Nobody else said that. And he said he took Colonel Blanchard out there. Just before he died of cancer, I asked, Frank, did you take Colonel Blanchard out to the crash site? No. Did you take Jesse Marcel out to the crash site? No. It's a long list. So TR-3B fits into that. Yeah, there are plenty of secret systems. The government spends an enormous amount of money on classified research. Let me give you an example. I worked on nuclear airplanes for General Electric, or General Electric, as we used to call them. In 1958, the AMP program spent $100 million. We employed 3,500 people, of whom 1,100 were engineers and scientists. $100 million is a lot of money in 1958. I mean, now it's peanuts, but still. So, lots of money. Most people didn't know about the program. It wasn't a black program. It said Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion Department on the door. It was great fun. I got out before the program was canceled, because I saw there was no leadership. And people say, well, how come we haven't done more, et cetera, et cetera? We need somebody like Admiral Rickover, who did the nuclear Navy stuff, the nuclear submarine, the nuclear aircraft carrier, et cetera. NASA hasn't had that kind of leadership. Once Kennedy said, let's get a man to the moon and back, by the end of the decade. They haven't had a goal. I hate to say that, but the goal is to get more money done. That's not a real goal. Yes?
Assuming you're right, what will it take to, overcome the cosmic Watergate? In other words, what will it take for all of the Americans and people in the world to finally realize that all this is true? And secondarily, you expect it to happen in your lifetime? Would you expect to?
If we could get any media group to spend what the Washington Post did on the political Watergate, you could do it in 6 months. What it would take would be people using the documents we had to show that they've been lying through their teeth. And Bolander's remarks, and those CIA documents, and the NSA documents. There's the proof of the pudding. I'm not just saying, well, I think they're covering things up. I showed you what they're covering up. And there's lots of those documents around. What it would take is the courage to start fresh and talk to all the people who can help them out, people not only like me, but lots of others, with the facts and the data. I'm not saying everybody in the media has no guts.
Well, thanks.
What?
I said, well, thanks.
Well, no, what I'm saying is I know that there are people who would like to do that, but the press is in trouble these days. A number of newspapers are skating on the edge of failure, financial, that is. So who's going to devote the time and the money? It's funny, the TV people know everybody's interested in flying saucers. They can put all kinds of garbage on it too. And people will watch it. But the press is unwilling to stand up and be counted because they have to admit that they had ignored this subject all the time. Think New York Times, Washington Post, etc. All the news that's fit to print, sorry. That doesn't fit the way they covered this subject. There's one of the dozen PhD theses that's been done about flying saucers was on press coverage of the subject. The guy, what's the School of Journalism at Northwestern? There is a School of Journalism there. And he had some scathing remarks to make about the failure of the press to do its job on this subject, to dig out the right people, to do all the other stuff. So I can't force anybody to do that, and I don't have the checkbook to write, hey, you guys, get 4 of your best people that spend the next 6 months, blow the lid on the cosmic watergate. Would cost some money, and I don't have that money. If anybody knows any rich guy who'd like to see the job done, talk to him. And if you got any ideas, talk to me, I'll help. Yes?
On the subject of government cover-up worldwide, really, is it mainly because of military considerations, or is it a control issue where a few people know and they don't want everybody else to know?
Let me give you my favorite 6 reasons for all governments to want to cover this subject up. 1, you want to figure out how they work. They make wonderful weapons delivery and defense systems. They can fly circles around anything we got flying. You got records, you set up secret projects. Rule number 1 for security is you can't tell your friends without telling your enemies. They listen to the radio and read newspapers, etc. Second problem is the other side of the same coin. What if somebody else figures out how they work before we do? How do we defend against them? We don't want them to know. We know they know. That's an old game we've been playing for a long time. Bigger spear, stronger shield. Pretty soon you can't get the spear, etc. The third problem is, what if there were an announcement made tomorrow by 2 highly trusted people around the world, let's say the Queen and the Pope, that's an odd couple, but they're about the same age, saying that indeed some UFOs are alien spacecraft and they're neutral. What would happen? Church attendance would go up, mental hospital admissions would go up, the stock market would go down. And I believe, based on 600 college lectures, that the younger generation, which unlike me was never alive and there wasn't a space program, would push for a new view of ourselves. Instead of Americans, Canadians, Greeks, Peruvians, Chinese, Earthling. Ain't no government on this planet that wants its citizens to owe their primary allegiance to the planet instead of that individual government. Nationalism is the only game in town. People in power don't want to give up power. There's another problem, the Pat Robertson problem. He carried a lot of influence. He said that there's no other intelligent life besides that which is here. And if it turns out that aliens are visiting, there goes his whole structure. Fifth, some people say, look, Stan, if they're coming here and we're not going there, that means they're more advanced than we are, right? Yes, certainly. Well, that means that soon there'll be new methods of energy production. There goes the oil industry. New methods of ground and air transport. There goes, cars and planes. new methods of computers and communication system, economic chaos. I said, yes, but there aren't many buggy whip manufacturers anymore, are there? You know, we managed to get through that. And finally, I have on 7 different occasions been quietly told about situations in which pilots went up, American pilots or Western pilots went up to chase UFOs and never came back, where the families weren't told that. And it's strange what that means. The government doesn't want to admit it. And if you don't believe that they wouldn't tell the families what happened to their sons, brothers, whatever, there's a book called By Any Means Necessary by William Burroughs, journalist and history column. He looks at the case of 166 Air Force crew members of planes that were, I love the phrase, tickling the radar in North Korea, China, and Russia after the war. Going in to see how quickly the radar came on, what frequency they were using, and so forth. And sometimes those planes were shot down. We were in radio contact. Nobody was told the truth. Plane lost at sea, sorry about that. In 2001, the government set up a conference where they brought in the families, gave them the medals their sons had earned, and told them what had happened to them as best they could. Now, admittedly, we shot down some Russian planes too. Don't tell anybody about that either. These games have been going on. In the 50s, orders were issued to military pilots, shoot down UFOs if they don't land when instructed to do so. The cartoons have great fun with that, of course. But General Roger Ramey admitted, we scrambled jets more than 300 times, just routine. And that story wasn't carried by the Washington Post or the New York Times. It was carried by some very legitimate, the Louisville Courier and several other newspapers. Quoted the names of the people who reported on it and so forth. The public wasn't told. So, secrets are being kept, which we'd like people not to know that we've done things like that. And if I've talked to 7 people, there've got to be a lot more cases than that. People thought they could trust me and they had to tell somebody. It's funny, when you hold a really important secret and you can't talk to anybody, it grows on you. You really want to. And you know you should. But people tend to trust me, I guess. Some very interesting cases. So, I think those are the reasons for the cover-up. And I think there may be others. But I'm in no position to find out what they are. And if any newspaper made an attempt to hear only from military guys, and say more than events that took place more than 25 years ago, they'd be smart. I said this on a radio station up in Seattle. The woman hostess was being rather negative. Why don't we hear about any sightings? I say there are loads of them. I check my audiences. I find 10% have had one, but 90% of those people didn't report it. Well, I don't think so, she said. I said, why don't you try it on your program in the second half of the show? Ask people who've seen something to call in. She reluctantly did, and we heard some great stories after that, where people who heard the program and did call in, didn't ask for names. And that's one of the kickers. People don't want to be exposed. And so, there's plenty of data out there. You got to go after it. Look, I asked an RCMP man in Fredericton, New Brunswick, where I live. When there's a highly publicized murder case, you know, serious crime, and you ask the public, we need all the help we can get, anybody who knows anything. I said, you get lots of calls. Oh, we get loads of them. People really want to help. I said, what percentage of them are helpful? Oh, 2 or 3%, but that's how we solve most crimes. You got to go looking for it. And if you don't, it won't come to you. Because the caller is the one at risk. He didn't want to set himself up to be attacked. So these are my views on some of these things, and I'm not trying to play psychiatrist. I'm a dumb old physicist, not a psychiatrist. But I've talked to a lot of people about why didn't they record and that sort of thing. And so I think I have a pretty good handle on where people stand. Other questions? Yeah.
I can understand why governments would like to keep it secret. Hitler had secret programs that had been declassified, and Werner von Braun, of course, was
A Nazi, yes.
yes, and also head of our space program that got us
Violated the rules that Truman laid down, incidentally.
right. And so I could see where those instances would have it, but I've just been recently doing research because I found out about this event, but I've found out some research on Admiral Byrd that had an expedition to the Antarctica, and there was a battle of,
Well, the Byrd story is interesting because there's a guy who claimed to be his nephew who was saying how he found a hole at the poles and went inside, and it's an elaborate story. Well, I checked with the Byrd family. The Byrds are important people in West Virginia and so forth. And there was no such person in part of the family. And I talked to Byrd's pilot. Byrd was dead by this time. And the pilot said, look, I was with him on every mission he went. No such thing happened. However, on the glitch, sometimes he drank a bit much, and he might have said almost anything on those occasions. So what do I say? You know. So there are plenty of stories we don't know anything about, and I won't say that nothing happened in Antarctica. There's a very elaborate story about the Germans in Antarctica. You know, there's a whole mythology that's built up about all those things. Where are those PhDs who are working on strange stuff? You know, I wish they'd dig into it. So it's a gray area. I don't know. Sorry. Yes.
Another obvious participant in the cover-up would be the aliens themselves. Can you speak to that?
You mean why the aliens aren't mingling with us? Or?
Well, they seem to be obviously avoiding.
Why don't the aliens, you know, have fun and games with us? Sit down for dinner, game of bridge, whatever, you know. Because I think the aliens are here to do their thing, to fulfill their goals, what their civilization wants. We are a threat to the neighborhood. No, I'm serious. People look at me and say, what do you mean? How could we be a threat? Look, to go from the Civil War to fusion systems in a short period of time means we're a threat to the neighborhood. And to go from 10-ton weapons to 10 million tons, we're not nice guys. So I think every civilization has to be concerned about its own survival and security. I don't think the aliens think of us as equals. We're not. Either morally or technologically or any other way. The history of this planet is pretty gruesome. There's lots of good stuff has been here. That's not what I'm saying. There hasn't been any. But it's not just the Holocaust. Like I say, 60 million people killed in World War II. 1,700 cities destroyed. These are not nice people. You can say, well, it's the governments. I don't care how you slice it. So I don't think we're worth talking to. I think there's loads of civilizations out there, maybe colonies all over the place. We're one of the backwaters, but you gotta watch out. We don't need any more Pearl Harbors. And every civilization's got to be concerned about that. And again, I'm not saying that nuclear fusion is the ultimate. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's good enough to get us to the stars. And if I were an alien, I'd be worried about these idiots getting to the stars. I think they're here to quarantine us. Wouldn't you want to? When you think about it, you wouldn't want to quarantine us? Let us run wild out there? Come on.
This is not any kind of an interesting question. What would be the political, scientific, psychological motivation of aliens, obviously intent on covering up their own presence?
But covering up from who? We don't have a need to know for what they want. If I can put it that crudely. I won't speak for the aliens.
The Nazis were obviously very dangerous in Texas 150 years ago. They didn't stop people from at least trying to accomplish?
Look, I'd love to see somebody work on this by asking an alien, hey, what are you guys up to anyway?
Well, that's what I'm asking. Surely that's.
I don't know how to do that. So I work with what I've got, not with what I don't have. And, you know, like I say, I'm a dumb old physicist. I'm not a psychiatrist running thought experiments on alien philosophy or psychology. All I can look at is what we can see. They're concerned about nuclear weapons. Finding Robert Hastings has written a book, Nukes and UFOs. And I don't blame them for being concerned about nuclear weapons. Do you realize that we have exploded 2,000 nuclear weapons on this planet? Only 2 on people, thank God. But 2,000 weapons. What would an outsider think about this? Wouldn't be nice. Wouldn't be nice at all. Yeah, in the back.
Yes, sir. I was wondering what you thought about the possibility of life on Mars.
Say that again?
I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the possibility of life on Mars.
I think there may have been life up there, and I think that any civilization that's advanced enough to traipse between star systems can, what's the term, create the planet so that it can be suitable for terraforming. You know, who would want to live in Las Vegas 200 years ago? Hell, nothing there. My goodness, impossible. A lot of people live there now because we terraformed. We made it suitable for people to live there. And some people think so anyway. So I think there may very well have been some kind of life on Mars in the past. Maybe a colony. Who knows? What's really important here is to recognize our ignorance about our past. You know, when Henry Schliemann said, this is where Troy is, about 1870 something or other, he used the Iliad as his guidebook. You know, Homer's book of fiction, said the historians, what are you looking for? Troy. There was no Troy, that's fiction. Fiction, you know? Well, he could pay people to dig down 75 feet and they found Troy. Darn little of the planet's been explored 75 feet down, you might have noticed. So and that was only a few thousand years ago. It took 40 years for plate tectonics to be accepted. Now we act as if it's perfectly obvious. Any kid will tell you South America and Africa fit together, you know. But how come planets move? Impossible. My book, As Science Was Wrong, was going to be entitled, It's Impossible, Isn't It? And in many instances, the answer had to be, no, it isn't. Just wait a while. Give a little support. So there's an awful lot we don't know. And I'm not saying we should send an expedition to Mars, although it's not a bad idea. I thought by this time we would have done that when I was working on the space program. Everybody I knew was in the space program. I thought we'd have a base on the moon by now. It's a failure of leadership. Of course, the aliens might have told us, stay the heck off our moon. And we might have said, well, okay, what do you give me to do that? Who knows? There are a lot of imponderables here. So, I don't know if there was ever life on Mars. And I don't know any Martians to ask, what's the history of your planet anyway? Other questions? That's all. She goes. It came all this way, and that's all the questions. Okay.
I am wondering if you've ever interacted with Ray Bradbury.
If I ever did what about Ray Bradbury?
Interacted with
No. No. Brilliant writer. He's not one of the 3 science fiction writers that I skewer in my chapter on flying saucers and science fiction. That was Asimov, Bova, and Clark. I was incredulous about Asimov. He said some very stupid.
Very what?
Stupid. You know, not smart. Well, read about it in my book and you see what I mean. It's not a casual comment. I even interacted with him a bit. He's famous for responding to everything that people send him, send in response to letters and stuff. And I got back one that said, after I sent him a copy of the paper I'd done, he had said something about me and whatever. So then I got a note back from him saying, this is to let you know I received your letter, I will not respond, and I will not respond to you in the future. So don't bother to write me anymore, basically is what he said. I guess he told me. I guess I got under the skin. Now, Isaac said either they will talk to us or they will keep hidden. If they do neither, they're not aliens. Like he's an expert on alien behavior. He talks to the aliens all the time, to find out what they would or wouldn't do. What an absurd point of view, right? Other questions? I'll sign your books. Thank you very much.
Well, certainly thank you, Mr. Freeman, for your wonderful talk. And believe it or not, we're only halfway done. We've got a full slate tomorrow, beginning at, the doors open at 8 right here. The guys will be here signing books and autographs and talking about this, that, and the other. We'll begin our program at 9 with our first lecturer. Just to remind you that the House of Culture Museum, which is across the International Bridge tonight, will be open in Okinawa, excuse me. And there will be going on with UFO research lectures until 11 p.m. And you're certainly welcome to go there. That concludes our program for today. We will be open tomorrow at 8 a.m. and our first lecture will be at 9. Okay, thank you.